Thank you very much, James. I'm very happy to be here today. I guess that we're completing with this panel an important part of your puzzle is how do you grow? And in my portfolio, I noticed that we need about over 3 million of investment money, VC money, to get to that first million of revenue. So most of the questions today will try to complete that picture that you have been forming here today. So I will start with the most important question that everybody wants to know from the VCs in the room. So Barnaby and Steve, what do you look for in a SaaS company? Considering that right now most of the companies in London are SaaS-based, can you detail your strategy?
Sure, I can go first. Can you guys hear me? Yeah. Well, first of all, it really depends on the stage of the company, right? So we are a pre-seed and seed stage VC based in London and in Dublin. So looking really for the companies nearly pre-revenue. So it's a very different sort of story when you're looking, say, later on at Series A, Series B stage companies. So I think for us, when you're trying to preempt a SaaS-style company and what it's going to turn out to be, you're looking for a team that's capable of getting a product to repeatability. You're looking to a product that can be sold with very low friction, where the onboarding is really, really straightforward, where the time to value for the customer is really short, and where that team can build sort of sales machine, which is really what powers every SaaS company. So by sales machine, ultimately, once you get to Series A and Series B, you're looking at an ability to ramp on, SDRs, salespeople, AEs, marketing. You understand fully your customer acquisition cost. It costs X, you can make Y, lifetime value is Z, and you just get the machinery where you're layering on revenue with each individual customer you get. So I suppose the key thing for any SaaS business is that core economic model of the incremental value that each customer brings, how long you get to keep that customer, and how quickly you can get that customer on board. So it's essentially about retention and about ensuring that each individual customer accrues to the revenue growth of the company. So there's a whole ton of questions that lead up to that, but that's essentially the core economic thing you're looking to.
That's brilliant. How about you, Barnaby?
Sort of similar but different, and maybe because our focus is more on enterprise software, i.e. the B on the other side of the B is quite a big B, and often IT departments as well, who tend to pay quite a lot for annual recurring revenue tickets. So I think what we're looking for in no particular order is team, probably the most important. And I think the word team is important. We have a lot more success when we invest in people, groups of people rather than individuals, I have to say. Market size, and it's always great when the market gets big on you, i.e. you start in a reasonable market and then it sort of gets very big when you're going through, which is difficult. We like things which are a little bit harder than usual, so we think that gives some form of defensive moat. But I think the key for us is that we model pretty much all of what we do on businesses getting to at least £10 million worth of revenues. We invested seed to Series A sort of round. So our first point, if you like, is can this business get to £10 million worth of revenue? Therefore, can it be worth, depending on growth rate, 30 to 100 million pounds, let's say. And how cash consumptive is that journey going to be? I think what we are in at the moment is, I think, a world where growth is everything, but today we've got to do it more lean than we used to have to do it, and it's that trade-off between those two things.
I agree with you. Well, I think this question has to be contrasted with the entrepreneur's journey. So I will ask Tim and Tom to detail their experience fundraising and how they've interacted with the VC and PE community so far.
Okay, well, thank you, Flavia. I think always fundraising is a hot topic for everybody, and I think part of the reason for that is maybe an unfortunate one, that people sometimes regard it as being free money, and I think that's a mistake. So I think rather than talking about raising money or raising funds, I think it's better to say you're selling something. You're actually selling your company. Now, the question is how much of that you want to do, and at what value, etc. Should really sort of govern how you go about this. And I'd even maybe even take a step back from that, particularly within a SaaS context, is to look at, for example, the recent developments in terms of now you can pretty much build a SaaS business entirely on Amazon or Google. With Amazon now, with Amazon Lambda, you can start to pay for per compute cycle rather than taking out individual servers. The cost of setting up a SaaS business has actually dramatically come down, even just over the past 3 or 4 years. So with that in mind, I think always you should look at raising funding as being it's something that does have a cost. It's got a cost in terms of equity ownership going. It's also got a cost in terms of management time. It's hugely resource intensive for all the management team to raise funds, and it takes a lot out. So that would be the sort of the main point I want to make is just sort of go into fundraising with a clear idea of why you're doing it and how that capital is going to help you, because it may be that there are other ways of reducing your funding requirements that might actually make things easier for you.
Brilliant, thank you.
Well, I think I'm definitely going to be the odd one out, because in my last company we did 2 exits, and in this company we've raised a couple of times, and I've never done VC. So it's definitely an alternative way of funding, I think, to kind of look at it. Fundraising just doesn't have to be, one particular path. I guess I'm talking from experience of being like a sales leader and a founder. For those of you who's relevant in the room, I'd probably try and stay, I know you don't want to hear this, right? But you probably try and stay privately funded as long as you can. Like the guy was saying down there, in terms of how easy it is to get to the points that you want to prove in terms of what you're trying to achieve as a business. So many things can change and go wrong in those first 2 or 3 years. If you can keep hold of because you are selling something, right? You are giving up your business, and no matter how much percentage that is when you do it, it changes. It changes the landscape, it changes the environment, it changes how you operate. So, one thing in terms of fundraising would be definitely think about it. It's very easy to go out and just say, all right, we're going to do some convertible notes, we need to spend money on this, this, and this. And just because everyone else does it doesn't mean it's the right thing to necessarily do. So that's kind of my take on it from a kind of starting point of view. Fundraising can happen in many different ways. You just got to choose the right path for you.
Okay, that's a very important point. I guess I'm going to dig a little bit deeper, and I want to know, as investors, how do you work with your portfolio companies to help them scale? I have a very large portfolio, so I always find new ingenious ways of bringing the knowledge, the investment, the opportunities to our founders in whatever format. And I'm always curious to learn more about what other fellow colleagues are doing, so that we can understand whether we have a best practice in our sector, or if we should start building one if we don't have anything. So I'm going to start again with Steve and Barnaby, and then we're going to put this question on its head for the founders.
Okay, I'll jump in. Again, it depends. I think in most cases, well, let's talk about our companies. We've got 40 companies in our portfolio. And I think the biggest value we can do for those companies as part of what we provide is to connect those companies together. So we have a platform. We bring our companies together frequently. They come together at CEO summits and at CXO events and sort of workshops that we organize. But in some respects, it's about just getting out of the way of these companies and allowing them sort of a safe network that they can communicate and share with very like-minded peers. Now, of course, as a VC fund, we also hope to bring to bear the network that we've built, over years. We've a network both as being sort of long-term investors and also operators. I've been an entrepreneur myself for about 20 years. And so we have, a fairly dense contact network that we can sort of weaponize effectively for these companies and make it available to them, hopefully to help accelerate and grow those companies. So it's all about doing everything you possibly can to remove barriers. But at the same time, you're not managing these companies. You need to stand back and just let the company, do its thing, do what it was that you invested in them to do in the first place.
I could not agree more. Barnaby, what's your take?
I agree. I think my particular thing is a real aversion to premature scaling, as we like to call it. I just think, and it kind of talks to what you were saying earlier. I just think there's a hell of a rush in life in certain industries to grow, and unfortunately, that can be extraordinarily wasteful at best, and sometimes really quite damaging to organisations. And so I suppose we're quite hot on making sure that businesses do things kind of in the right order. But look, and when I say in the right order, we all talk about product market fit. We all talk about niche marketing and sort of hiring the right people and all these sorts of things. But we see lots and lots of companies which hire loads and loads of people and spend loads and loads of money before they've got any of that. And it just seems like really bonkers to us. So I think one's got to be very careful in the initial engagement and be very collaborative in terms of what the plan is, and then let it be, but get involved if people start doing things in a crazy order.
Thank you so much. Okay, for our founders, I would like to know, if you had investors in the past, what have you found particularly beneficial from your interaction? How have they helped you on your journey to grow? And what sort of experiences have you had? Are there any bad investors out there?
Me again? Yeah. I guess if you look at it from my point of view, when you're making a decision about an investor, I think Joss, the guy before, was talking about how he made his decision, and it was just about the valuation. For me, it's all about the relationship, because if you haven't got the same mindset on the end goal, you're pretty much screwed from day one. I've met lots of investors in the States, and not many companies are going to become unicorns, but they all want the next unicorn, for example. So if you actually really, really think that your company is going to be $1 billion company in the next 5 years, and you're having those conversations with those people, that might not be the right fit, right? Because where you're going to take your company. So it's all about being realistic, I think, in terms of that. So we had non-exec directors, we had high growth private equity. They believed in what we were doing. They believed it was a culture first business, what we're trying to achieve in the next 5 years, and those goals were aligned. And it was a great relationship because of that, because everyone was on the same page and everyone wanted to deliver the same thing. And even with our investors now, I'll talk very candidly and openly about our business. We're not just about top line revenue. We want to grow a sustainable business that is profitable one day, even if that's many years from now. So a lot of VCs won't like to hear that, and they won't necessarily like to know that the goals are more realistic and there's a base plan and there's a plan of what you want to achieve over the top. But I think you've got to have an investor that is generally just aligned with what you're trying to achieve, and then you'll have a great relationship.
That's brilliant. How about you, Tim?
Again, I'd very much sort of echo Tom's point that it is very important to have an alignment with the investor. But one thing I'd say, which is it seems a kind of a small point, but it's something I personally get a great amount of value out of, is that when you are sort of plugged into with some sort of VC investors, it is incredibly useful, to Steve's point, to network with other CEOs, because everyone's got some hints and tips of how they do things, and it's really useful and valuable to know that. And on that same line, I always find it incredibly useful to actually see pitch decks as they come through. And the reason for that is because it gives me just like tremendous intelligence on the market. And even if somebody's doing something in automated kiosks, which has got nothing whatsoever to do with my business, it's just useful knowing it. It's useful knowing that there are people thinking about it, what kind of customers they might be looking at, what kind of size of markets they are. It just gives me that sort of 360 view. And just to tie back to the very first question that Flavio asked, that's one of the reasons why VCs will never refuse to see a presentation, because it's just tremendous intelligence. It's just so useful to understand what's going on in the market, to have that input into that field. So for me, the value of the investor is certainly beyond just the cash, but is actually that opening into that broader network.
You know what? You have provided me the right opportunity to actually start going back to the market. I think there are substantial changes within the investor, PE, venture capital, and I want to hear everybody's opinion. What do you think 2018 is going to represent for SaaS businesses looking to fundraise? In no particular order.
Okay, I'll jump in there first.
Good.
I'm not sure that 2018 is hugely different from 2017 structurally. I do believe there's a huge amount more capital in the market right now. There's a lot of, particularly early stage, there's a lot of venture funds being formed, a lot of early stage funds now available. I think the one thing that I've seen that's changed, that's sort of turning everything on its head, is obviously blockchain and ICOs. It's hard to know exactly how much of the, say, venture industry that's going to take over, but it's certainly going to disrupt a chunk of it. I certainly believe that. And I think the whole crowdfunding model is another thing to keep an eye on. But fundamentally, it's a growth business right now. There's a huge number of opportunities, and I think there's still a lot of opportunity for disruption in the SaaS space as we start seeing more and more AI, for example, come into play. When you look at all the traditional sort of SaaS businesses, all the traditional enterprise software is ripe for disruption still. So it's a hot area for me.
I don't think 2018 is a special year. There is a boatload of money out there, and there's a great deal of angel capital as well. We're talking about whether VC is the right route. I mean, there are businesses which are getting to £100 million market caps without raising venture capital these days. So there are plenty of other ways to do it, and it probably took the venture capital market 10 or 20 years to get used to working with angels. But what I say to entrepreneurs is, look, I'm a tiny fund, and venture capital probably doesn't represent 50% of the market anymore. So there are so many opportunities. I don't really have a view on ICOs at all. Maybe somebody could explain it all to me later.
Well, with so much capital in the market, I think that means valuations are going up, funding rounds are substantially increasing. Are you seeing any of this in the sector?
Actually, I think the number of deals is going down. So the weight of capital is increasing for a handful of very, very, very successful businesses. I think is what the figures will say. So, I don't know, deal numbers might be down 10, 15% year on year for the last year or two. Mm-hmm. So I think what that talks to is a little bit of a flight to capital. So I'm not so positive about venture capital, the number of deals increasing, if you like. I think there's a bit of a flight to quality.
I definitely see a bit of a trend. This is just from what I see, where I see a lot of younger VCs starting up and saying, we do things differently. Here's some seed money. I think you'll see a lot of companies finding it easier to raise money in the early part, and then they'll find it really hard when it gets to an A or a B round, because they'll be stuck at 3 million ARR. They'll have a lot of cost in their business, and they'll just be a bit of a brick wall with funding at that point, like you're saying, because they'll just go to the big boys who are doing really, really well. So if you make that funding decision and you go down that path of angel and then VC, just because you've done the first seed round doesn't mean the next round and the next round is going to actually come. So I think that's definitely something in that as well. I think, what we've just gone through funding recently, and, the question of IP comes up a lot, and, everyone's space is different, right? But, especially in SaaS, particularly in sales and marketing, there is so many products out there. The market is so crowded. So for me, definitely how you differentiate yourself in terms of how you sell your product, how you service your product, because SaaS is a very crowded space now. There's an element of nothing is unique. So definitely what I see in 2019 and beyond is the consolidation of SaaS as well. People generally get excited about having less tools or less tools doing more for them. Because they just overload. People have Franken stacks of all sorts of things going on, and they're paying lots of money for things that way. So that's just a trend I see as well, in the market.
That's a very good point. Many players in our space say that actually great companies, they don't sell out. They acquire other businesses. And do you think that 2018 and 19 are going to create that wave of acquisitions and consolidation? Do we actually see that? Do you agree with that trend?
I don't see that, maybe on Barnaby's point, I don't see 2018 or 2019 being any different than before in terms of acquisitions. I mean, as Josh explained during the presentation just before this, at some stage you're going to want to exit because you are going to want to basically buy the Ferrari and everything else, or the Volkswagen. That's always going to happen, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing really depends on the dynamics at the time. Obviously, a lot of it is down to situations that you don't have any control of, like 2008, things like that. So I think that will just roll on. Just to make a comment on the earlier question about what's maybe generally going to happen, I do think we're maybe going to get to the, if you like, the trough on the Gartner hype cycle for both blockchain and for AI. I think for slightly different reasons. I think for blockchain, we're still to sort of understand what the killer app is. I certainly don't believe that smart contracts are, for one thing. And for AI, and I think chatbots are a great example of this. The use cases are certainly there, but the technology just doesn't quite seem to be quite there yet. So I think in both cases, I think we're going to see some disillusionment this year and next year going forward, and that will affect funding and everything else.
Arguably, what happens after the disillusionment, though, is where the true value starts to get created, right? So I think, it's very exciting nearly that we're coming through to the point where we're getting to the stage of disillusionment or the trough, because there's obviously something very interesting happening. And once we start building out the infrastructural components of blockchain or whatever that turns out to be, and once we start understanding more about how we can sort of pivot into these sorts of different economies and different ways of incentivizing, the market, it is going to open up a completely different way of doing business and transacting and generating value. And we're in that cycle right now. It's nearly a privilege for us to be here looking forward to that and to have an opportunity to participate in that. Obviously, we also have to take our pain now because there is going to be a correction. I saw a stat recently where I think 93% of all ICOs are deemed to be fraud. Some ridiculously large number. So obviously there's a huge amount of money that's been invested on the back of enthusiasm around cryptocurrencies that is going to get lost. But out of that, I think we're going to see a real disruptive change in how software is created and distributed. So that's exciting.
Okay. So nothing new, considering that Brexit is just a few months away. You don't think that the European market and UK is going to be affected. We're going to still have the capital to compete with the US. Because I'm looking at most of the largest deals are actually happening in the US. I think that out of my portfolio, 60% of them are SaaS businesses, and they all want to cross the Atlantic. How important is that? And do we have what it takes to compete with the US VC market?
I think very much so, and indeed one of the sponsors here, Pipedrive, is a fantastic example of that, who crossed not so recently into the US. Zendesk is another one I'm sure everyone's familiar with. I think, though, to Barnaby's point about doing things in the right order, there can sometimes be a risk in trying to go across to the US too early. One of the things that's been very apparent to us is that, because we're in the CRM market, it's very, very competitive, but very, very big. And the two things often go together, size of market and number of competitors. But it does mean that, frankly, we can meet a lot of our revenue expectations just with, customers within walking distance of the office. So I think it's important to Barnaby's point, to do things in the right order. You are going to have to go to the US at some point, but you don't necessarily, need to do that from day one and build up all of those costs that you can't necessarily support going forward.
I think there's an opportunity component to this as well. My impression is that US companies, particularly value-based companies, are really taking advantage of that incredibly strong network effect you have in the Valley. and all your first customers are coming from the connections that the VCs who've invested in you have within that community. So there's this huge sort of self-sustaining bubble, essentially, nearly a filter bubble for sales and for growth. And then those companies sort of hit a bit of a ceiling as they start thinking about internationally, start thinking about moving, say, to the European market or to the Asian markets or whatever. And I think that's where we're seeing some of those companies falter a little bit. Whereas in our experience, at least, European companies and sort of UK-based companies, nearly by default, you think about the US market as somewhere you want to go to very, very aggressively and very, very early in your life cycle. And similarly, I think with Israeli companies. And I think that mindset prepares those companies for international growth in some respects a little better than if you're based in the Valley. Now, having said that, to counteract that, the Valley has more capital to deploy, and that network is really a superpower, from a world perspective. But Brexit itself, I think, creates issues structurally for funds, but I don't think it really creates any huge issues for the companies trying to grow businesses in Europe.
Yeah, there are a lot of questions there. I think certainly in the enterprise world, you have to be in the States at exit, and you've probably got to have maybe the center of gravity has got to be in the States at exit as well, just because that's where the buyers are and that's where the big customers are. I think it is crazy to go there until you've got a very, very good grip on what your product offering is and what your market engagement is in your domestic environment. I mean, Brexit, I find, I won't go into it, but I find it really pisses me off, the whole thing, actually. Not least the fact that our political, our governance is so poorly aligned to what people think. I mean, it's not about left wing and right. Anyway, it's enough of that. I think it's damaging to us. I think it's like putting a kind of damp blanket on our quite vibrant economy. I think it's going to affect very talented people, and if we haven't seen it yet, we will see it. And people go home and they've stopped coming here, and I'm upset about it.
Oh, okay. Tom, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I guess this may sound basic. I was very lucky in my last company. I got to set up the US office. I've lived in New York for 3 years, lived in Boston for 2 years. I think one really simple thing is that in the US, because of the size of the country, money, different things that have gone on, travel, like they are the master of inside sales, in that country compared to selling here. And in the UK, everyone likes to get on a train, give each other a handshake. It's a very, very different environment. So I think how you sell as a SaaS company and scale is completely different until you learn how to do it in the US. That's a blocker because selling is different over there. So I think if you're a European startup and you're thinking, it's just easy to go on my doorstep, how can I acquire my first few clients? You've got to understand that a little bit as well, which I think is kind of key. But going to what Barnaby said, if you're in the UK market, you've got to a point where you've got your first 100 customers or whatever, how many million of revenue, there is no barriers or borders these days, in my opinion. Like, if you look at our first 20 customers in my new company, they're everything from Australia, Singapore, Toronto, all over the world, for various different reasons, and because our product lends itself to being scalable like that. But I think, if you really home in your inside sales model as a SaaS company, you can sell to anywhere in the world. And if you can crack that, and learn why you've got seats on bums in London, then when you do put people on the floor in the US, you'll have much more chance of succeeding because you've done it that way. That kind of makes sense.
Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, so I will have my final question, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor. I want to know, what companies are you really seeing in the market advancing SaaS models? What companies do you think are going to be the next unicorns that the market will really back? Everybody will have very different choices, but I'm very keen to know, what are your up-and-coming unicorns? No particular order.
I am sort of morally obligated to talk about a company in my portfolio, so I think that should nearly discount me from the answer. We have a company in our portfolio we really like, Pointy, which is essentially bringing the offline sales process online and surfacing local product search all the way through to Google Maps and Google Search. And we think that's incredible, that makes every mom and pop store visible now, and their inventory visible through Google Search. So we're very excited about that one.
Thank you. Keep an eye on that.
We're not massive unicorn hunters, I have to say. I think, but it is a phenomenon. I mean, they do exist, and they might be real. I suppose we're let me give you an example of a company that's just raised $30 million. One of our portfolio companies. This is a company with about $15 million worth of annualized revenue. Very, very high proportion of that recurring revenue. It's raised $30 million from the US growth equity fund. I think, and it's growing at 60% a year. I think, and it's enterprise sales. And I think it's, in a way, I think it's possibly more helpful to think about when that big growth equity thing happens, because there's a lot of luck, as we've heard earlier. But to me, that seems to be the benchmark. It's a sort of £10 million worth of revenue, 50-60% growth. You're not too far away from the shore in terms of burning through cash. Hundreds of customers, and if you have that, people from around the world will invest in your company and will put a lot of money into it.
Thank you. How about Tim? Any unicorns?
I don't know, because I'm so focused on the space I'm in, which is sales tech. There's only one winner, and that's Salesforce, whether you like it or not. I don't know. I think it's interesting from the space I'm in. There's some real battles going on. If you look at companies like Drift in Boston, who are really competing with Intercom, just taking a load of funding, things like that would be interesting to see what they do. Again, their aim is like to be multiple tools in a platform. So, I'm so in that space. I'd say they're probably one to watch.
So, I think Tom's comment gives me the perfect entree into my own Salesforce story. So I was very much impressed with Salesforce back in 2002, primarily because I'd lived through a particularly brutal Siebel implementation. It spent maybe like 3 months and got nowhere. And the company was a software company at the time. It spent almost $1 million in both software and services to fail with that CRM system. So for me, the whole idea that somehow you could have this no software model was absolutely disruptive. And in fact, we put Salesforce in less than 3 weeks. I mean, nowadays, we think that's horrible onboarding to take 3 weeks over it. But in 2002, that was incredible. And around 2003, I was actually trying to raise funds from Intel VC. And I was essentially coming out with all sorts of enthusiasms about the SaaS model. And in those days, people thought SaaS was nothing. Maybe it might just do something for SMEs or something. It wasn't really real or sensible. And I remember the guy mocking me, saying, "Well, Siebel sure have big offices," when I was sort of suggesting that they would actually ultimately take over from Salesforce. Well, the big offices down on Highway 101 are actually now part of Stanford Medical Center. And indeed, I'm not even sure they even bother with the brand anymore now they've been acquired with Oracle. The point, though, is that every dog has its day. And Salesforce is obviously the leader in SaaS, not just in CRM, but the whole sort of SaaS industry. They did absolutely create it along with WebEx and others. But that does not mean they're invincible at all. And it's arrogant for me to suggest it. But I do believe that SalesSeek can one day take them on. And somebody else who's here, Pipedrive, I think they're well on the way to taking them on. So existing market presence is no guarantee of future success. And I say that as a former IBMer.
Thank you. Okay, we have 3 questions. Time for 3 questions. Anyone? Lift your hand if you have any on. Yes?
Hi, that's Roger Thomas. I suppose the scenario, the question for Barnaby and Steve. Scenario being that I'm in the market to raise capital. I don't know you personally. I don't have contacts that go to be introduced to you through stand out from the hype in terms of the approaches that you'll receive, the cold approaches you'll receive? Because I can't do it.
So good question. How do you stand out from the direct mail that we receive is the question for those who couldn't hear. Answer is that it's vital that you do because you know, a lot of VCs don't even really read stuff, I wouldn't have thought, that comes to them directly. I think that a very quick suggestion would, apart from these sorts of things, would be to look at that VC's portfolio, reach out to one of the CEOs in that portfolio, go and have a coffee with them, say, of course, sorry, say, you know, you're interested in raising VC, you know, could I just pick your brains? We're kind of interested in dealing with these people. And I think if you can get an introduction from that individual, I think that's a really neat way to do it.
Yeah, I'd sort of echo that. We did an analysis fairly recently, actually, on that exact topic. So in the lifetime of the fund, so it's a 5-year company, we've been in existence, we've seen maybe about 5,000 companies, which I think is about average. Not a single one of those that came in via, let's say, a cold lead, a cold email, or a LinkedIn ping, for example, turned into anything beyond a lead, actually got into our what we call our qualified stage of the pipeline. So clearly that's not working for people who are using that as an approach. We also did an analysis of people who said that they weren't able to get in contact with us, just through surveys and things, and it turned out a lot of those people absolutely would have been able to get in contact if they just looked at their LinkedIn status and see they're one person away from one of the partners or, as Barnaby said, one of the CEOs in our network. So really, it's impossible to think that you're unable to connect with a VC through some set of links. It's just you need to find the link and work that, and you know, go to conferences where you know they're presenting and go up and chat to them and you know, buttonhole them in that way. The other thing I'd say is we're actually bad, as Barnaby says, at actually dealing with good quality leads that get generated through these sort of organic inbounds. And we, as a sort of let's call it our lead generation funnel, is appalling. And again, it's based on time. So that's something we are looking to improve, because we do recognize there are good opportunities that come through from maybe entrepreneurs who just aren't quite as up to speed on what it takes to talk to or get in contact with a VC. And we consider that to be a failing of our pipeline and our interface. And that's something that we hope to change as well and are working on.
Yeah. Actually, maybe I can just sort of add a further comment too. I mean, I would approach this as an initiative test. So to Steve's comment, I mean, yes, you can get a direct connection to pretty much any VC if you put your mind to it. So that's the challenge. What I would say maybe a little bit more constructively is I do think it's worth investing some time in the pitch deck. It really shouldn't be more than 10 or 12 slides. There is a sort of a reasonably formulaic way of doing it, which gives the VCs what they want. And in particular, because I actually answered a comment on this on LinkedIn just today myself, the one thing I think is missing from almost every pitch deck I see is a realistic and honest assessment of the competition. You know, too many times people say, well, what we've got here is completely unique, there is no competition. And of course, the reality is there's always competition.
I just got one thing to add. This might be helpful. Don't think that you can't get them to come to you rather than the other way around. Good starting point would just be get your ranking down on Crunchbase, yeah, and they'll start to filter through big VCs in the States anyway. In terms of coming out to you, I'll probably get every 2 or 3 weeks one reach out to me and filtering. Another thing I'd say as well: don't send the deck till you meet them. Yeah, meet them first, get them to give you their time, give them something back. No one's going to understand your business off the bat. You know, it's changeable. So I would always say have that conversation first, whether it's over the phone, video conference, whatever. Don't give up something till you get something back either. Your time is just as valuable as theirs, and you'll get it wasted. You know. So
there's just one other addendum to that. Just very briefly, do not think of a VC firm as some sort of well-organized, well-structured company where if you get in contact with one person, that somehow gets into the firm. Think of it as a feudal system where there are a series of different partners, and you want to find the partner in the right firm that matches particularly to the type of company you are. Because different partners have different things they look for and like. So just try and sort of do your DD on them as well and figure out who the right people are to talk to.
Yeah, and just on that comment, there's a lot of similarity between VC firms and also for example, large accountancy practices or management consultancies, where they are very much individual. And hopefully, I'm not going to offend anyone if I say that in many cases the partners may be a little bit more internally competitive than perhaps they externally present themselves to be. So again, it very much get the partner that you want.
Okay, we have time for one more question.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing better than a referral, right? In terms of being referred into someone to have a conversation. It's a really old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. So I think the more people, like you're obviously at this event that James ran today, you're going to meet a load of new people who have either had funding, been through funding, who you can find people who are going to connect you with the people that are going to work for you effectively. So, anything you can do to speak to people that you know what they like to deal with, how they operate, and like anything, right, when you're selling, you want to create a pipeline, just treat it exactly the same way. You're creating a pipeline of investors that you want to manage, that you want to assess, that you want to decide who you're going to take forward. So sometimes it can be like I'm interviewing for the job, I want to get it, but it's the other way around as well. You're giving up part of your business, like Tim said earlier, so just treat it like any sort of sales process and go through it that way. That would be my opinion.
Yeah, I'd very much second that, and maybe just to add some other sort of practical tip. One of the things you might want to do is think about other companies that you particularly admire and see who they took funding from. And maybe when you look at a VC, the first thing I look to is not the partners, is the portfolio companies. So I want to think, do we want to be in that list of those portfolio companies? And I think that way you might find some good sort of complementary fits that might make sense for you.
Well, I guess that's all. Thank you very much for participating today, and to our panel members, well done. Yeah.